again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Fun topic, sort of. Let's do it. What's the craziest crime you or someone from your family has ever committed? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. So before I was born, my parents were apparently going through some tough financial issues and were facing eviction if they couldn't come up with a certain amount of money by a certain date. My father decided the best way to handle the situation would be to rob a bank. So the story, as I was told, goes like this. My father walked into a small bank with a ski mask on and his hand in his pocket. He went up to a teller and handed her a bag, telling her he was robbing the place. He had a gun and exactly how much money he wanted, which turned out to be exactly the amount needed to avoid eviction. He got the money, apologized to the teller, and then left. He was never caught. The next part of the story is a little weird, and even I have a hard time believing it, but I know my dad. He's no liar. Apparently a year or two later, my dad went back to the same bank he robbed every day until he found the teller he robbed previously. He walked up without a mask and handed her an envelope and immediately left the area. In the envelope was the exact amount of money he stole and a note saying that the money was for the teller, a gift, and how incredibly sorry he was for scaring her when he robbed the place. Again, he was never caught. My father's a very honorable man who was raised in poverty on an Indian reservation. Because of the abuse he went through, both at home and at school, residential schools have a bit of history to them, he vowed that his kids would never have to go through what he did. I truly believe that robbing that bank was a result of that vow, but emotionally hurting that woman at the bank really ate away at him, so he risked getting arrested to try and make it right. Mother's cousin of some level, not sure on removed or third denotations, had small business in New Jersey for several years, never produced, sold, or marketed anything anyone was aware of. He left a message on our answering machine saying, "Goodbye and best wishes," confused us all. ATF, US Marshals, FBI, DEA, and IRS raided the shop, only to find it empty, as relative dude was already yachting to Cuba, where he jetted to the other side of the planet. Humorless guys in suits randomly checked in with family members for several years thereafter, asking for his whereabouts. We had no idea. Got an old-fashioned postcard from him years later in Phuket. Haven't heard a word from him in the years since. No effing idea what he did. My grandmother accidentally killed her second husband when he asked her to shut off the breaker while he did electrical work, but she didn't do it. She shot her daughter's second husband in the back and claimed self-defense. He was an abusive alcoholic cop. She got community service. She forgot to buckle in her brother, who had muscular dystrophy, and had a car wreck on her birthday. When he didn't die, she used the rock to bash his head. Cops found the bloody rock, but for some reason didn't think the case was strong enough. She accidentally let her elderly charge down in the bathtub when she was a home care nurse. The last one I know of, she suffocated her last elderly charge with a pillow. She was found incompetent to stand trial because she faked senility. That was 10 years ago. She's now 88 and ignores all COVID-19 restrictions. She's still driving even. So many men have proposed to her over the decades. They have no idea how lucky they are she said no. My dad's older brother came home from the war in Vietnam to find that his wife had been cheating on him with his best friend. He locked them both in the friend's house and burned it down with them in it. He held the firefighters off with a rifle until he was sure they couldn't be saved. Then he shot himself. This was before I was born, but I've seen some newspaper clippings about it. My aunt, father's side, kidnapped my sister when we were moving to America mid-80s. I was quite young, and my mother and father thought it would be best to keep my sister, a toddler at the time, in safe hands until we settled down for a week or two. My aunt had 3 or 4 miscarriages prior to this happening. Must have driven her mad. About 3 years later, my sister was spotted with my aunt's husband at a farmer's market one day. Family friend tracked the husband. Police got involved. My sister ended up on a plane to the US within a week. My dad has this really weird habit of stealing signs, which has manifested in a bizarre way twice. The first requires minor backstory, in that his family has lived in our small town since it was founded, and as such, we have a street named after us. My dad insists that because the street sign has got his name on it, it's technically his property, so he annually steals it. The second, I'm not even quite sure how he pulled it off. You know those giant highway signs that direct you to what lane you need to be in for your turnoff? Where I'm from, they're huge and green. Some effing how, this madman has managed to get one into a shed overnight by himself. This thing could easily weigh a literal ton. I'm so impressed. He's also acquired other strange things, such as a Ford factory sign, also one of the giant ones, several billboards, bull skulls, commemorative plaques, carousel horses, and a bunch of other miscellaneous items. Whenever he runs out of space, he just builds a new shed. He's also not allowed in Canada, but won't tell me why. My dad was traveling through Tibet in his 20s. I don't exactly know where, but he came across what was evidently a secret Chinese military installation. Being my dad, he decided to take some photos and was somehow spotted. Armed guards, presumably shouting Chinese expletives, started running up the hill toward him. He turned around and hightailed it back over the hill to the road, where he hid himself in an irrigation pipe. He had to hide there for several hours while they drove up and down the road looking for him. Makes me wonder what the hell was in that base, but could just be that they thought he was a spy. Anyway, eventually he paid a passing farmer to hide him in his cart, and he made it to the nearest town. After spending the night in his rented room, he packs up and gets on the bus out of there. Small problem, he happens to look out of his window and sees a Chinese soldier standing by the bus. I'll always admire this bit of quick thinking. He decides to shave off his quite big beard. It evidently works, cause he's here snoring in bed right now and not rotting in whatever Chinese equivalent there is to the gulag. TLDR. My dad was seen taking photos of a presumably secret Chinese base in Tibet and was chased by armed guards until he escaped them and shaved off his beard to escape. Got stoned, drunk, and rode an electric scooter with a friend, only to end up in front of a huge fence with barbed wire I decided to climb. Huge mistake. It was a military base. I ran out of there at light speed when I realized. Fortunately, I escaped. My grandfather was often drunk, but when he wasn't drunk, he would pretend to be drunk so that the Soviet Communist Party members responsible for interrogating all those who might be opposed to communism through and said, he's a drunk, we'll question him last. This gave him time to gather resources so he could escape with my dad. So, although public inebriation probably almost certainly wasn't a crime in most Eastern European countries at the time, late 40s, he would have been gulag bound if he had been caught in the charade. My father tells this story of a time his friend picked him up in a stolen Camaro for a joyride. At the end of the night, the stupid driver decided to use a gas card they found in the glove box to fill up the tank. When everyone in the car realized that this would help the cops find the car, they drove it to a lot, stripped it of all the parts they could use on other cars, and lit a gasoline-soaked rag and hung it out the gas tank. This explosion rocked the town, and no one ever figured out who did it other than us hearing the story 35 years later. One of my great-uncles was highly involved in sanction busting for the apartheid state in Rhodesia. He worked for the Netherlands Bank of Rhodesia and was forced to stay and work through the threats to his family by the minority government. Luckily, he managed to convince the government that his kids simply must have a British public school education, and that his wife would escort them to London for the start of the term. Whilst they were abroad, they were taken into protective custody by the British government, and he managed to slip over one of the land borders to safety. He was flown back to the UK for debriefing and was kept in that country for a while. He took up farming in the deepest and quietest bit of countryside he could find. My cousin and some friends decided to run their bill, leave without paying, also known as dine and ditch, at a Bennigan's. Their server ran after them to attempt to collect payment, and my cousin and friends ran over and killed her. This led to a nationwide policy change in most big restaurant companies, where they, 1, stopped taking this kind of thing out of the server's paycheck, and 2, implemented a strict don't follow policy for customers who ran their bills. Petty crime, but at the time it felt like the perfect heist. I was a teenager with some friends at this restaurant that served your meal in this large, round, branded platter or tray. For some reason, I was determined to walk out the front door with one. I came up with a plan. My friend and I held hands so that we made a bridge, set the tray on the bridge, put a coat over the tray. I had another friend sit on the tray. We walked out the front door carrying him and singing "For He is a Jolly Good Fellow." It held the mixtapes in my car for years until I upgraded to a stolen USPS plastic mail bin. When I was 15, the bank foreclosed on our family home. My dad was pretty upset, so he, with the help of myself and my brothers, completely gutted the house. We took the ceiling fans, cabinets, all appliances, every bit of copper wire, the fireplace, a giant cast iron monster. It wasn't easy. Front and back deck, board by board, the banisters, anything that had any value whatsoever. We even took the water heater and sold it to the real estate agency that was selling the house, which they then had to reinstall. For the record, I'm not particularly proud of this, but I still tell the story quite a bit. I'm not sure how he got away with it either. Maybe it was because we still technically owned the house when we did it, or maybe they just couldn't prove it was us. My great-uncle smothered my great-aunt in her sleep with a pillow. She had cancer and was suffering a lot. She made him promise to do it. He calmly called the police and confessed. They were married for maybe 50 years. He's the sweetest, most gentle cinnamon roll you'll ever meet. I think he asked for no mercy or anything from the court. I cannot remember the specifics about that part. One of my family worked for the UN in Africa for some mandates back in the 70s or 80s. He needed to bribe some guys in order to reach places. So he bribed a guy, traveled down to the destination. In the meanwhile, another guy took over the charge of the area and found out that he bribed the enemy. So he got arrested and thrown into jail. He only got out because he has a dual citizenship with the UK, and those guys bailed him out very quickly after his home country of Switzerland failed for a course of 3+ months. My grandma and her lover murdered my grandpa. Probably 9 or 10 years later, her lover, now husband, went on to kill her. After she was dead, he went on to remarry and killed that wife too. They suspect he killed his previous wife, who had passed shortly before my grandpa did. He confessed on his deathbed and mentioned that they killed his 90-something-year-old mother as well. My extended family likes to try to pretend that he made my grandma do it, but he didn't. She did it because she wanted out of her marriage. My grandpa was a nasty, abusive kind of guy, but she wasn't any better at the end of the day. He was in his 30s, married her when she was 17, and then had 6 kids with him. At least one of them, my mom, isn't actually his, and there's probably plenty of his unknown kids out there as well. Grandma died on my 13th birthday, and I used to think that the number 13 was legit cursed because of all the superstitions surrounding it. It was just bad timing, that's all. I know she's your family and everything, but your grandmother was just an absolute cold-blooded killer. Wonder, anything else happened in your family? My uncle started a fight in his regular pub in his 20s after they tried to charge him an extra 10p for his usual lager and lime, 10p for the lime. He kicked the shit out of the bartender, broke a police officer's nose, and it took 8 of them to bring him down in the end, I believe. He still boasts to this day about how he came out of prison with more criminal knowledge than he went in with, and how he used to make metal hooks for the other prisoners, which they'd use to scale the fences to try and escape. He thinks it makes him sound cool and edgy, but he's a dickhead. Can't stand him. When I was a dumb 6th grader, my best friend was a hardcore vegetarian. The McDonald's was going up practically in the backyard of her fam's condo. We snuck out and spray painted things like meat equals death on it, keeping in mind that I was a happy omnivore. But then we pulled up these rocks the size of our heads and threw them at 2 huge 7 to 8 foot windows. Think of the windows at the front of a McDonald's that let you see the entire inside. Took a couple attempts to get them to shatter. We snuck out a lot. There was one time around age 15 when we applied heavy makeup, wore our slag clothes, and got into a frat party. She lived within walking distance to campus and smoked pot for the first time. When I was 12, I shot out the back window of a cop car with one of those wrist rocket slingshots. It shattered it into a million pieces. The car skidded to a halt. The cops got out and started waving guns around, but me and the other kids decided it was better to book it into the woods on our bikes than get taken home in a cop car. We knew these woods like the back of our hands, and the cops were on foot, so we all got away scot-free. The next day, the story was in the newspaper, and my dad spent 15 minutes railing on about how parents didn't bring their kids up right these days, and if it was my kid, I'd beat his ass until it shined like a new penny. I listened attentively and agreed with assessments of the day's youth. My dad, mom, and I test drove a Nissan when I was a kid around 6 years old. Back then, you didn't have to have someone accompany you in the test drives, and from what my dad said, they didn't even make a copy of your driver's license. Well, we lived in Ohio at the time, and there was a lot of snow on the ground since it was winter. The Nissan they test drove was a two-seater. My dad was driving, and I was in my mom's lap. My dad wanted to play around, and he did donuts in the snow like normal him. Well, this time the little Nissan was too fast for him to control in the snow, so when he did that, he lost control and hit a light pole. My parents and I got out of the car and walked back to the dealership. My mom and I waited a little bit further down the road. My dad got our family car and picked us up. A lot of years went by, and I asked my parents did they ever pay for that and or had to deal with the lawsuit. My dad told me, no, I didn't even go inside the dealership. We just never went back to them again. So I guess I'm sort of an accomplice to stealing a car and wrecking it. My Uncle Steve had an ongoing feud with a local cop in Idaho, and one day he stole some blasting caps and dynamite from the mine he worked at and tried to blow up the officer's police car. It didn't work because apparently it was just a greasy paper bag under the car with wires sticking out, and my uncle's friend ratted him out after the bomb was discovered and disposed of. My uncle ended up serving somewhere between 5 and 10 years in prison, but on the bright side, that was the event that led to him getting sober and dedicating himself to the program. Now he's over 10 years clean and sober and is in a leadership position of his local AA chapter and has helped hundreds of people get their lives together since. He's still a racist asshole, but you take what positive change you can get. Myself and a friend once stole the statue of Colonel Sanders from a Japanese KFC. We were both in the military, and at the time, we took it out of our unit and placed it behind the desk of our battalion commander, who was Colonel Sanders. We also broke into his quarters at the BOQ and stole a uniform to put on it, our drunken version of an April 1st prank. He was a pretty chill guy and thought it was extremely funny. The Japanese police were less amused. Other than that, I guess there was the time my maternal grandfather was investigated by the Russian army for the murder of 100 or so German POWs. I never got the full story from my bushka before she passed, but there were a few things in his belongings that hinted at it.